Kent Myers.
I'm Mick Cornett, and it's time for the verdict.
As a part of its traditional and continuing commitment to public and community service, Crowe and Dunleavy Law Firm presents The Verdict, an objective discussion of contemporary legal issues hosted by Kent Myers. And also brought to you by a friend of Oklahoma Lawyers for Children and Delta Dental Plan of Oklahoma. And welcome to The Verdict. I'm Mick Cornett. Thanks for joining us, and let me waste no time in introducing my co-host and one of Oklahoma's top legal experts, Kent Myers. And Kent, once again, we're going to take on the First Amendment.
First Amendment is a topic we could probably do 3 months worth of shows on if we really wanted to, but we had a good show in the past with Ben Blackstock and Bob Ravitz, and we're going to have them back again today. With all that's going on since September 11th, one byproduct of it has been what the media is now starting to call the war on journalism. We're seeing pressures being placed on journalists, pressure being placed on TV networks and newspapers to not publish information. And the war on journalism has, as the other side of that coin, the restriction of the freedom of the press. And that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about whether that's appropriate. We're going to talk about the act, the Anti-Terrorism Act that Congress passed recently, and what kind of very expansive rights that are granted to the government, and at the expense potentially of your and my civil rights. So we're going to be discussing those subjects. I think it's going to be interesting again.
Well, I also want to draw attention to our website, theverdict.tv, so log on and tell us what you think about this show or any other show. You know, every week on this show we are an example of the First Amendment, and today it's the actual topic. The war on journalism. Should be a lively show. You're watching The Verdict. We'll be right back.
The Journal-Record is pleased to be a sponsor of The Verdict. The Journal-Record, since 1903, the best source of Oklahoma business news and legal information.
I enrich our cultural landscape.
I help define our quality of life.
I am one of 4,000 artists in central Oklahoma who receive
support from Allied Arts, this community's united arts organization.
I am an allied artist.
In Oklahoma, there are more than 1,600 children waiting to be adopted. They're of all ages, and for many, home has been a source of pain and conflict. They've dreamed of finding a better life and a loving family. Consider adoption. For more information, call 1-877-OK-SWIFT or visit the website www.okdhs.org. Adopt. It may be the toughest job you'll ever love.
And Blankenship has stopped at the line of scrimmage. No gain on the play. Leaving it 4th and 7 on the Tiger 46-yard line. 38 seconds on the clock. The Tigers have no choice but to go for it. Wiggins had to do the kicking. Here's the snap. And the kick is away.
All children deserve a life of hope and love, but sometimes they experience a life of pain, neglect, and abuse.
When that happens, each child deserves all of the quality assistance and representation that can be offered in our legal system. Oklahoma Lawyers for Children has over 350 of the best attorneys and volunteers in Oklahoma County who donate their time and services to represent children. For more information, call 405-23-CHILD.
Oklahoma Lawyers for Children, helping to bring hope and love back to the lives of abused children.
Welcome back to The Verdict. Mick Cornett with Kent Myers, who's going to introduce our guests.
We are really pleased to have guests returning this week. On my right is the Oklahoma County Public Defender, Bob Ravitz. Bob's making his third appearance on the verdict. Bob has dealt with many cases involving confidentiality, dealing with people's rights to have information disclosed or not. He has dealt with civil liberties a lot, and as a matter of fact has been the recipient of awards for his civil liberties defense work. Bob is the Oklahoma County Public Defender, as I've indicated. He has been involved in over 75 capital cases, in other words, death penalty cases, and is quite experienced in the courtroom. Bob, thanks for coming back.
Thank you, Ken.
On my left is Ben Blackstock, returning for another visit on the verdict. Ben, for 44 years, was the Executive Vice President of the Oklahoma Press Association, is a World War II vet, flew B-25s, I guess it was.
No, I was on a B-29 crew in the Pacific, and I was a radio operator and a staff sergeant.
And stayed out of the way.
No, we got to land at Iwo. We lost an engine.
That's pretty
appreciate
good.
all the things the Marines did up there.
Well, we're glad you made it safely back.
Thank you.
Because you can now be here for another week with us on the verdict. We want to talk about, putting it in the wartime context, we want to talk about what some people in the media are calling a war on journalism. We have two experts as our guests, and once again I want to remind our viewers that Mick Cornett is an additional expert we have with us today, in addition to his duties as
Can I
co-host.
write that down? I've never been called an expert about anything.
Well, if you, as they say, if you have a briefcase and you're out of town, you're an expert, and we're down in Norman, so I guess that
I thought an expert
qualifies.
was a drip under pressure.
Well, we have our share of those.
Here I am.
The thing I want to talk about initially is the government's apparent attempt to restrict what journalists are publishing, both from an informal standpoint and a formal standpoint. I want to start off by referencing the National Security Advisor for the President, Condoleezza Rice, has been reported in the press as trying to get the television networks not to run the tapes of Osama bin Laden, which he released shortly after September 11th. Ben, let me start with you. What do you think about the White House putting pressure on the TV networks not to run those tapes?
There's nothing new about that.
Is it appropriate?
Well, whether it's appropriate or not, why they feel that that's the mission that and they feel like that if they networks or the television were running these tapes, as I understand it, that Osama bin Laden is going to have some message mixed in there to his troops in the field. And they don't want them to be running these tapes that are sent in to the stations because they don't know what the mix is. At least that's their reasoning for it. I don't find anything particularly wrong with that. I think you said a while earlier this afternoon that it's they run them all over Europe. They never give it a second thought.
Well, what if CNN wants to go live from behind enemy lines, wants to put a reporter there, wants to do whatever they want to do? Should they be restricted then?
As they did with Wolf Blitzer before.
Exactly.
Yes. I don't think so.
I mean, CNN almost sometimes it seems like they want to be an independent country. I mean, they want to be so global and so independent that other countries won't mind them coming in and doing live shots, war or no war.
Well, did you think that was an exceptionally good piece of coverage there?
Exactly, sure.
And
Who
you
could turn
watched
away?
that?
Who could turn away from that?
I did too. I admire their enterprise to do that. You know, it's better than, for example, some of the other things that not just the television but also the other media, particularly supermarket tabloids, do to upstage the rest of them, to have that, get out there first. You know, after all, news is people in conflict with society. That's my simple definition of it. Okay, and we have dull news days, or they say in the trade, we have no news days. So they have to go back and fish up something. It seems like they do that too much, I think. You know, there's a lot of things they don't cover that they ought to be covered.
Well, Bob, what do you think about this restricting them or suggesting that they restrict not only the television networks by Condoleezza Rice, but Ari Fleischer from the White House staff went to newspapers and said, don't publish the text of Osama bin Laden's statements. What do you think about that?
I think we have to look at two differing issues. The first is if it is really evidence that is going to hurt Americans, in other words, injure Americans through this message, and we have a basis for believing that, I think it might be justified as far as the television is concerned. Certainly it wouldn't be justified as far as the print media is concerned, because he wouldn't be broadcasting or giving any type of signals. But if the reason is to shut off a message that I don't like, I can't stand, a message that you can't stand or any of us can't stand, we still should play that if the media feels it's appropriate. And I think that's what we got to balance. We got to look at, is it a danger? Is it a present danger? If Ms. Rice thought it was a danger, she should have mandated that the television stations not put it on.
She can't mandate the media.
Do that.
How could she under national security, of course she could.
No. She can plead and beg, but that wouldn't,
all
that's
they had
as
to
far
do
as
is
she's
walk
going to get.
into a courtroom in Washington, D.C. and get a temporary injunction that prohibited the media from playing that.
Wow. Has that ever been done?
No.
That's a pretty big step.
Well, I think if there was a legitimate threat and a dangerous threat that could harm Americans, I think it's possible that a court would grant that.
Well, it's done all the time. It was done all the time in the Iran-Contra scandal. When the special prosecutor was trying to get information and publish information, and the defendants said, no, this is national security stuff, and got prior restraint orders. So I think
they just muzzled the witnesses.
They did.
That's
indeed.
it. They didn't. If you want to see something in print, order the media not to print it, or the television not to air it.
That's
and
a sure
it'll
way
be
to
there
get it
quicker
done.
than anything.
Well, I don't know. In the courts today, do we know the names of any of those 1,000 people that are currently in jail that are alleged that we're looking at as material witnesses?
They've run their names in the paper. I've seen some names.
Some
in
of them,
there.
not
some
all
of them. Well, that's because that the FBI and the CIA don't know who they are.
They know who they are.
See,
They're saying there's somebody. Should whatever name they're using be public record?
It's just like
If they don't know who they are, why in the world are they holding them?
Well, they're holding some of them, and they're hoping to hold others.
Yeah.
That's the thing. See, but they're leaking some information, hoping they will get some leads.
Yeah.
See?
Well, it must be a tough thing
That's
to deal with.
manipulating the media.
Let me ask something we may have to take up after the break, but I want you all to focus.
Why don't we just go ahead and take a break now, King, because I know we're getting ready to get started on something else. We're going to interrupt. We'll be right back. This is The Verdict.
Yeah, campfire's a lot of fun. You get to make some friends. You get to do some cool stuff. Campfire's for boys too, not just girls. But hey, campfire's definitely for kids. So call the campfire office nearest you to join in on the fun. 'Cause let's face it, you're not getting any younger.
St. Gregory's University has been changing the lives of people like me for 125 years. Affordable, private Catholic education, balanced with dedication to community and service, makes St. Gregory special. We're extremely proud of our students' outstanding academic achievements and our nationally ranked athletic teams. It's when you help a student build a future of balance, integrity, and service that you change a life forever. St. Gregory's, a community for life.
Yesterday was plain awful. You can say that again.
On Broadway is Oklahoma's premier youth musical theater company.
Bringing our daughter here was one of the smartest things we've ever done.
I've learned a lot. I've gained a lot of confidence. They helped me develop talents I never knew I had.
And it's fun.
On Broadway, Oklahoma's premier youth musical theater company. Now enrolling in Edmond. Call 330-CAST. That's 330-2278.
Every day, in state governments throughout the country, crucial decisions are being made that affect the lives of children and their families. But as this process takes place, children are often left voiceless. When these children raise their hands to be heard, Is anyone listening? There are people listening. They are child advocates. Join us and raise your hand for kids.
Kent Myers back on The Verdict. We're discussing the First Amendment, specifically how journalistic entities are sometimes restricted. Kent, where are we here?
I want to talk now a little bit about the Patriot Act of 2001 that has given substantially greater powers to the government to do things in regard to the citizens than the government ever had before, at least legally had before. And I want to talk about whether some of these restrictions are appropriate or not. But before we get to that, I want to draw into the past a little bit and talk about what happened right after Pearl Harbor. FDR issued an executive order requiring the mandatory internment of Japanese citizens, both American citizens and non-citizens of Japanese descent, in these United States, and they were held in these internment camps for long periods of time. Today, historians look back at that and say, what a horrible violation of those people's civil rights. As a matter of fact, there is a plaque at one of the posts where they were held that says this: may this plaque serve as a constant reminder of our past, so that Americans in the future will never again be denied their constitutional rights. The question I want to raise with our guests is this Patriot Act of 2001, which seems so appropriate under the circumstances brought about by the September 11th tragedy. Are we going to look back 10 years from now at the restraints we're putting on our citizens and say, you know what, we did it again? It's not Japanese internment here, but it's keeping people behind bars without charges for long periods of time or longer periods of time. It's eavesdropping of substantial proportions. And are we getting ready to repeat the mistakes of the past? Bob, you're familiar with this Patriot Act and some of the provisions, some of the restraints. What do you think?
Ken, I mean, there was a lot of good in the Patriot Act. There's no question about it. There's a lot of stuff that scares me.
Like what?
For instance, we can now take somebody and we can hold them for up to 8 days without bringing them before a judge or stating why they're in jail. Now, people say, well, it's only 8 days. Well, can you imagine if it was your daughter or my daughter was in a foreign country and they were swooped in by the government of that country and put in jail incommunicado for 8 days? It would be tremendously upsetting. And unfortunately, that's the case with this particular act.
Is it an overreaction then, Bob?
I think parts of it are an overreaction. That's not to say that if we have a basis, if we go before a judge and we have some reasonable suspicion or probable cause to believe this person is involved in terrorist activity, I believe absolutely we should put them in a jail for a period of time and determine if a crime has been committed.
Well, let me interrupt you and ask about something called a roving wiretap and how that differs from the wiretaps that government agencies have been able to use in the past.
Well, under the bill now, before the government could wiretap your individual home upon making a showing of probable cause to a judge. Now, it's not just your phone. It's your cell phone, which I don't have a problem with, but it's also your neighbor's phone because it's any phone you may be going to use at any time. It could be the convenience store phone that you occasionally use could be bugged. That invades all of our privacies.
Well, what kind of showing has to be made to get that kind of a wiretap?
Nothing right now.
Well, that's a substantial departure from prior.
Absolutely.
Ben, what do you think about that, plus the intercepting of emails, the internet usage, the access to educational, medical, financial records that are all involved in this bill? Is all of this appropriate?
Well, I don't think anything's new about it. I think they've been doing it all along anyhow.
But not legally. If they've been doing it, they've been doing it illegally.
after each emergency, or particularly what was it to turn back 1800 or something, I can't remember the name of the act, but it was one with a great deal of controversy, had to do with the war in the colonies at that time. My point is that at the time of each national crisis or emergency, we have some kind of a knee-jerk reaction to passing laws. I'm glad to see them put a time limit or a sunset on these laws that they're passing now.
Because they're going to expire?
And, you know, and it doesn't bother me personally that if they're going to wiretap, they're looking that you are a suspect, that they're going to tap any phone that you come near instead of just your home phone. I mean, if you're a suspect, you're a suspect, and I personally feel like that is, you know, that they prove to a judge to his satisfaction. And by the way, there is, I understand, a secret, pretty much a secret court in Washington that doesn't do anything but rule on these things. No one ever hears about it. It's a federal court. But those things will finally unwind. There will be excesses, you know, they'll go too far. And eventually that will sort of boil down. As far as what Bob was saying about holding people instead of just 2 days, 7 or 8 days. I think they seem to be holding them now as long as they want to anyway, don't they?
Well, they're holding them under material witness warrants.
I mean, some of your clients up there,
but
you're a public defender, have they been held beyond 2 days?
But there's been a showing of probable cause to a judge.
Oh, really?
Yes. Under the Constitution of the United States, no one can be held more than 48 hours without a probable cause determination made by a judge. Okay, now it can be hearsay evidence or just a written affidavit by a police officer, but there has to be something that the judge approves. If not, there's a procedure that the sheriff lets them go in 2 days.
Of course, we're seeing excesses. The terrible thing about this particular act you're referring to, I think you said it was, what, 1,000 pages?
Yes.
Well, who read that?
Who wrote it?
Not only wrote it, I mean, everybody, the staff piled everything into the hopper, in the computer, and you come up with something that's 4 inches thick.
And who got to name it?
And the terrible thing, well, that's the first thing they do. They come up here and they get a PR firm to name this thing. And you know, it says
and how can you vote against it?
It's called the flag, the apple pie and mom act.
Yeah, you got to vote for that.
Everybody's got to be for it.
Even if you don't read it, you got to vote for it.
The problem is terrorists win when we take our freedoms and we restrict them more than is necessary to protect us from those terrorists.
Well,
and that's what we've done by that bill. We've restricted freedoms more than was necessary. We're doing things and interpretations which could be, who knows what a court's going to say, it could be even greater. But why do we do this? I mean, why do we allow our freedoms to be restricted by people? That's what they wanted to do. That's what they accomplished when they blow up buildings. If they can take our freedoms and restrict them, they've won. And that scares me.
Well, in World War II, it was just FDR issuing an executive order. This time, it was the Congress voting by overwhelming majorities to give these powers. These are our public representatives voting that way, and is that more or less a mandate from the people that we are willing to subject ourselves to?
Congress was doing what they thought the public wanted them to do. They don't really know.
Now,
you know?
Congress was protecting themselves from getting beaten in an election by somebody saying, you voted against the Patriot Act, you are un-American. And when we do that, or you're a communist, and we're going back to 1950s when we do that, that's why they didn't read the bill, they didn't know what was in the bill. And like I said, there are a lot of good things in the bill that I support. But the problem is there are things in the bill that are dangerous. They're dangerous to our liberties, they're dangerous to our freedoms as Americans, and people voted for it because of what it was called and because of a rush to judgment.
We've got to make that the last comment. Bob, Ben, thank you both of them for coming. I know you want to talk. Kent and I'll be right back after this. You're watching The Verdict.
Hello, my name is Ted Smith. I'm president of the board of directors of the Oklahoma Disability Law Center. ODLC provides free legal services in civil matters to people with physical and mental disabilities.
I'm Mike Sykes, Vice President of ODLC. For more information, call 1-800-880-7755.
The Oklahoma Disability Law Center provides high-quality legal services to people with physical and mental disabilities.
Boy Scouts of America, where above all else, character counts.
Bringing out the best in each student. That is the simple goal and tradition of Heritage Hall. The focus on the individual shapes the educational experience at Heritage Hall. Each student benefits from small classes, able, dedicated teachers, a solid academic curriculum, and exceptional co-curricular programs of athletics, arts, community service, and other activities. Parental involvement, personalized counseling, and the development of responsibility, integrity, and love of learning. If you want education taught with pride, then you want Heritage Hall.
We are back to wrap up another edition of The Verdict, and today we discussed the First Amendment and how it applies to some issues taking place in Oklahoma and around the world.
It was a fascinating discussion with our guests. They really get after it in an intellectual yet intriguing way. I think some people are really concerned that we may be repeating mistakes of the past with some of the vast powers that the government's being granted to look into medical, educational, etc. records of individuals without having any prior showing being made to a court that it's appropriate. Although I think there's a substantial feeling in the country that these are difficult times and they require difficult measures, and perhaps when constitutional rights get in the way of other constitutional rights, something's got to give, and this has been the judgment that that's been made, that this kind of power ought to be available. So we'll see whether it gets used or abused.
All right, another good show, Ken. Nice job.
Thank you.
We'll be back next week. Be sure and check out our website, theverdict.tv. Send us a line. Tell us a topic that you'd like to see us discuss. We'll see you next week. This program was brought to you by Crow and Dunlevy, a professional corporation. And also brought to you by a friend of Oklahoma Lawyers for Children and Delta Dental Plan of Oklahoma.